A good segue to get started. So thanks everybody for being able to make it. We're also recording this, so it'll be available for people to watch outside of this. I know that Peter Buchan, our assistant office director, has mentioned that this might be good for the leadership development group to be able to watch this as opposed to site visits. So we'll see how that actually works. Anyway, welcome to Traffic Topics. Today we're going to be talking about aeronautics, and I'm kind of excited about this subject. But you know, just as a little aside, has everyone seen Star Wars yet?
Yeah.
You know, why did the stormtrooper have to pick up an iPhone? Because he couldn't find the droid he was looking for. Okay, we'll just leave it at that. So this session on aeronautics is kind of the kickoff to our modal series. We're going to be talking about a lot of the different modes of travel. We're talking traffic topics, but we're talking about what the other modes of travel within purviews that the DOT has some influence in. Maybe not direct oversight, but there's a lot of influence. So we're going to be talking about aeronautics. We've got a session set up for freight. In fact, that's going to be the February traffic topics. We're going to talk about freight. We're going to do one on ports, waterways, and so forth. We'll talk about the bike plan in a few months, as well as a pedestrian plan. So we've got a lot of things that are coming up that'll be, I think, kind of interesting. But what this overview is going to be about is Minnesota has had a state aviation agency for 73 years. In 1976, the Department of Aeronautics is one of several agencies that was consolidated into the new MnDOT. This presentation is going to provide insight into MnDOT's role in aviation. And we're very lucky to have Cassandra Isaacson as our presenter today. She is the Director of Aeronautics for MnDOT, and the office is responsible for promoting aviation and aviation safety. They provide supports to cities, counties, and other agencies in the development, maintenance, and safe operation of public airport facilities. She's worked in transportation for 22 years and is a registered professional engineer in the state of Minnesota. So please help me welcome Cassandra Isaacson.
Well, thank you, Ken. I'm glad to know engineer humor hasn't really changed much since I've been working in aeronautics. Well, they always say the very worst place to be in terms of giving a presentation is right after lunch. And so I thought I'd start out today getting you guys going with a pop quiz. So, first, do I have any pilots by any chance? Sometimes there's a pilot. No one's a pilot? Wild guess. Acronyms. We're MnDOT after all. We must have acronyms, right? MSP? What's MSP? That's correct. Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. Anything, there's even pictures there. I've got pictures of the things for you guys. No ideas?
National Aeronautics Society for NAS? Could be.
It's the National Airspace System. So,
Georgia.
That is Georgia, but it's also general aviation. So we'll talk a little bit about what general aviation is in a bit. Anyone watch the news in the morning? Listen to the news in the morning? At the beginning of the day, they always say, and the temperature at the airport is, right? So there's a W up there. That might have something to do with, yeah. So that's the automated weather observing system. We have the FARS, and I actually have a piece of it, not all of it, but I brought the FAR AIM with me. It's a piece of federal aviation regulations. We'll talk a little bit about that. The VOR, which is that funny looking thing up there in the corner there, VHF omnidirectional radio. We also have PAPIs, precision approach path indicators, and then MALSers, and I've got a little bit more to talk about with MALSers as we get into the presentation, so we'll kind of save that one till we get to the end. So today I want to tell you just a little bit, sort of a little flavor of planes, pilots, and airports, who we, MnDOT Aeronautics, are, what we do, our role in aviation, and then some tools that you could maybe use in your day-to-day job as you perhaps interact with aviation. So, when you think aviation, what's the most important name that comes to mind?
FAA.
FAA, well, they're important, but I'm thinking more human name. Any ideas? Lindbergh.
Right.
Wright brothers, all important. There's one name that is the foundation of aviation. Have you ever been outside when it's really windy and you're holding an umbrella and all of a sudden the wind takes hold and the umbrella flips inside out? There's a principle at play that makes that happen.
Oh, okay.
And it's the same thing that makes airplanes fly, Bernoulli's principle. And so basically the principle is that as you're going through the flow, so the airflow, as the velocity increases, there's a pressure decrease. I got a picture here that'll show you. Let's see if I can make this mouse up. So here, this is there's an airplane wing right there. And so what happens is, as the air is flowing over that wing, it's flowing faster over the top of the wing than underneath. And that creates a difference in pressure. So the pressure below the wing is greater than the pressure above, so you get lift. And so that's the same thing when you have that umbrella happen. When the wind's flowing over the top of an umbrella, when you get that pressure differential, all of a sudden it'll flip. And so it's that same kind of, but Bernoulli is the principle behind it. We're not going to sit here and derive it from Newton's second principle or anything like that. But ultimately, that's that little bit of foundational piece. Here's an airplane, a very typical kind of aircraft, with all the different bits and pieces and parts. And I got a picture here in a minute that I'll show you that has kind of what some of the different things do, why they're important. So there's 3 axes of flight, right? So you have the longitudinal axis, so everyone kind of get your airplane out, right? So that's kind of going this way, right? And the ailerons, those that are highlighted there in yellow, that's how you control that. That's like the bank or the roll. Then you have another axis that's more this way, so nose up, nose down. And that's the elevator, so they're on the back of the plane. And then finally, one of my favorite words to say, I don't know why I've always liked that word, but kind of that weird side-to-side kind of thing, yaw. And I tend to think of it if an airplane, when you're thinking about a plane flying through the air, you can imagine the wind's coming, you're just going straight. But what if the wind's coming from the side? The airplane, the pilot has to compensate for that, so they kind of have to crab, so they kind of have to fly. And I tend to think of that some of that those forces acting on the plane from that other direction as well. So when flying truly is that, you got to think about multiple dimensions. When we're driving a car, how many of these are in play really? Your tires, if more than one of these is in play, it's usually a very bad day. Because it means one or more of your tires has left the pavement, right? And so aircraft, and as a result, a lot of the infrastructure we build associated with airports, it's important to understand all the different things taking place. So we have, obviously, lift. We talked about that. Weight, not just of the plane, but of the people and stuff on the plane. Weight is very important. Any of you ever been on a small plane before and a pilot perhaps asks you to swap seats with someone? They're thinking about their weight and balance. They're trying to make sure that the aircraft is as balanced as they can reasonably make it. Thrust, so moving forward through the air, and then of course drag. You have that resistance of the air itself on the aircraft. So that was a bit about planes. A little bit about pilots. So in Minnesota, I have it right here. So what did I do with that? I had my little book here. There we go. This is what a person needs to know to drive a car. So this is a Minnesota driver's manual. I don't know, what do you guys think that is in terms of thickness there? Not even a quarter of an inch, really. That's what you need to know. This is to become a pilot. This is for a private pilot. This is kind of that entry, and so it's just much more complex, in part because of the complexity of the aircraft itself, flying, those sorts of things. Medical certificate, and that's not a one-time thing. You have to actually, that's recurring. So if you're a pilot in the United States and you fly, even if you're flying recreationally. So perhaps you have a small plane or you're part of a flying club and you fly recreationally. You're regularly taking medical exams and letting the federal government know the results of those kinds of things. There's different kinds of pilots. For those who are aware, MnDOT has pilots. We have pilots that work for us as pilots. They're always commercial pilots, almost always more than 1,500 hours. So highly skilled, highly rated, very professional. Some of them come to us from military. Some of them were commercial airline pilots. Some were actually instructors with airlines. Just sort of a wide array of backgrounds that those pilots might have. But they walk in the door with all of those hours and skill sets. We don't train them up. Have any of you ever gone to a highway oasis before? So you're driving along, typically on toll roads. I see some heads nodding. Tell me kind of what a highway oasis is like.
There's an off-ramp, and then it's got parking. Usually you can get gas or something like that. I haven't been to one of these, but
exactly though. There's an exit ramp, you exit, and it's a lot of times with toll roads when you would find these. There's where you can get fuel. Sometimes it's kind of a rest area too. Maybe there's some picnic tables, area where you could walk your dogs. You go inside a building, there's maybe like a food court. But generally, those facilities, the underlying ground is almost always owned by the government. So maybe the state owns it, and then there's this mix of private ownership. Clearly, like this one, looks like there's a McDonald's. Clearly the state doesn't own McDonald's. So there's this mix of public and private that are occurring at that facility. That's what an airport is. An airport is a public-private mix. So many of you probably been to MSP, but it's true of small airports too. It's typically publicly owned. So the government at some level owns the infrastructure, but then there's a mix of private businesses perhaps selling fuel, selling food, all of those kinds of things on the airport itself. One of the big differences between an airport and the ramp that you describe as you exit off the freeway is that we all use the same ramp. When we exit off the freeway, your skills as a driver don't matter. The kind of vehicle you're driving doesn't matter. The weather that day doesn't matter. Usually there's one ramp, and that's the one we all use. When it comes to airports, there's actually multiple ramps. And the ramp you select depends on the aircraft you're flying, your skills as a pilot, the weather that day. There's a variety of factors. The airport itself. So different airports can have, so one place, as you're headed to that runway, there's actually multiple ramps coming out of the sky to target that runway. And it's all and the pilot is responsible for knowing all of those factors to decide which ramp they're going to take to safely exit the sky, if you will. And so when you think about an airport, it really is kind of like that oasis. It's where you're going to get fuel. Perhaps sometimes you'll even get food. Oftentimes there's little restaurants and cafes and things like that. But they're the entry and exit points for the National Aviation System. So in Minnesota, we have 135 what we call public airports. So publicly owned, publicly funded, open to the public, right? So the public owns them, city, county, state, government owns them, and they're open to the public. Can someone think of an airport that would be owned by the government that's not open to the public? Anyone here a snowplow driver? No one? Do you know where they go to get their spot training? Camp Ripley,
so
right?
Airports.
That's right. Military are publicly owned. Clearly, the public owns those facilities, but not just anyone can land their plane there. Does it like Camp Ripley? You actually can. You have to have there's certain permissions you have to get, certain conditions under which you're allowed to land there. But so there's public, which is just sort of that. What we would tend to think of the way almost we would think of the highway system. You just go there. There's also privates, where it's just, some private citizen, perhaps they have a farm or something like that, and they have their own runway where they and they alone land. Sometimes there's private that are open to the public. We have quite a few of those in Minnesota. Things like seaplane bases are often privately owned, but they're open to the general public. There are some that are privately, and then there's this mix of things like heliports, where helicopters land, like at hospitals, for example. Sometimes that hospital is a publicly owned facility, but clearly not just anyone can land a helicopter there. It has to be someone who has permission to land at that facility. So I tell folks in Minnesota, and so we tend to talk mostly about the public airports, because those are the ones that tend to receive public money. And they're the ones that a lot of folks are interested in, and including the general aviation public, because those are the ones that they're free to fly and land and that sort of thing. More airports in Minnesota than there are counties. So there's quite a lot, and there's a couple of counties that don't have an airport. So that means that there are some counties, obviously, that have more than one. These are the categories of airports we have in Minnesota. This is our definition, our categorization, the way Minnesota state law has set it up. Different states also categorize their airports. A key airport, those are going to tend to be near your large economic centers. Business jets can land there. Airlines can land at some of them, depending on how long their runway is. The intermediates are more of what most people would think of when you think of a municipal airport. You know, there's that airport you drive by sometimes, and they got a sign outside that says, "Learn to fly here," or something like that. And maybe they have a pancake breakfast every now and then. That's what most people think of as that municipal airport. And then, of course, there's the landing strips, the turf. There's still quite a few turf runways that we provide funding for in the state. And so ultimately, those are the three categories of what we consider state airports. So airports are part of the state aviation system, the public system. So a little bit more of an exercise for you. So when it comes to highways, we're able to communicate through things like signs and pavement markings and things like that. Well, airports are able to use some of that. Obviously, we use a lot of radio navigation. There's a lot of communication that goes on between, you know, from pilot to pilot or from pilot to air traffic control or something like that, because it's kind of hard to hang signs up in the sky. So there's all different kinds of communication that take place. But this is out of our airport directory. It's just this is Brainerd for anyone who's curious. And so one of the things, next time you land at MSP, you can impress your seatmate by being able to understand some of the things that you're seeing. I'm going to pass around the room here a couple of things for those who are interested. This is typical airport signs and markings, and then this one is also, it's basically flashcards. I haven't torn them apart, so if you look at something and you look on the back side, it'll tell you what it is and describe it. But ultimately, the first thing I want to talk about here is how runways are numbered. So I gave you a clue here because I thought that there might not be a pilot in the room. So let's start right here. Let's look at this 34. Any idea why that might be a 34?
So 34 degrees off the north axis.
Close. So what we do here, is 340, right? We take that trailing zero off. And so what this means is that when you're taking off from this runway, you would be going 340. So you'd be going almost due north. So that's the takeoff direction. Because you'll notice way up here at the other end, if you're taking off the other way, that would be 160 degrees, right? Look at this one right here. What do you think that one is? Right. If it were 5, so if that runway were actually going almost due north-south, it would be 0.5. We put a leading 0 on it. And so that's really, so when you're taxiing at the, when you're at MSP and when is this plane ever going to take off, and they're taxiing, and and you look and you see all those signs and all those numbers, that's what some of that is conveying. The runways themselves, the taxiways themselves, is giving direction to the pilot. So they know where to navigate the plane once they're on the ground for sure. And then this is sort of a zoomed in version. Remember I mentioned this guy right here. That's these. And these are navigational aids. There's all kinds of them. But this is a medium approach light system with runway alignment indicator lights. Many of the different kinds of lighting you see approaching at runways, because even things like PAPIs and stuff like that, what happens is as the plane is coming in, the aircraft, they can actually communicate with that lighting back and forth. They can make it do things, but it's ultimately telling them, are they on their right path? It's giving them information based on the colors of lights, based on what they're able to see, and communicate back and forth with the aircraft. So there's a lot of that sort of interaction. This particular airport has two Mausers. This airport, airlines fly in and out of this airport. So it's many airports you would see would have nothing like this because they would only be visual flight rules or something like that. So that's just, I wanted to show you an example of where that would be and what, because I'm sure that probably many of you have seen these kinds of things when you've been around a large airport for sure. Small airports, you wouldn't see something like that. A little bit about what aeronautics does. So no intent to go through the detail of this particular slide. It's mostly just to give you, one, to let you know that there's an entire chapter of state law for aeronautics and aviation. Chapter 360 has been developed and written through the years. Minnesota has had a state aviation agency for over 70 years, and so with that comes all kinds of associated laws and that sort of thing. So we tend to use Chapter 360. There's a few other chapters that have bits and pieces and parts, but ultimately the thing to know is that our role in aviation is actually much, much broader than it is in highways, and the commissioner has much, much more authority in aviation than in highways, which is, I think, surprising for some folks because they think, wow, you know, little bitty aeronautics, it's just one office in all of MnDOT, but it's quite a broad role, and the way I try to describe it, particularly for folks at MnDOT, if you took state aid, a little bit of Department of Public Safety, a little bit of MnDOT, a little bit of Department of Revenue, and some Department of Education, kind of mix those together, you get closer to what our role is in aviation. So pretty broad, lots of things we're supposed to do. These numbers are actually a bit high. I would say there's fewer pilots and fewer registered aircraft now than there were when we first created this slide. This was another piece I wanted to show you though here at the bottom. You see all of those things are airports as well. So there's actually, you know, when aeronautics is talking about airports, we're almost always talking about the public. So not just the MSPs, but the Hawleys and the Fostons and the Detroit Lakes and all of those airports as well. But we're mostly talking about that 135. There's actually more of all the other kind combined. But because they're private, depending on what they are, we have less and less and less a role with them. General aviation. So that was the Georgia, one of the things on that first slide. General aviation is everything except the airlines and the military. Everything. And it accounts for 75% of aviation in the United States. I think most of us think of aviation, we think of getting on Sun Country, going to Mexico in February, that kind of thing. The reality is most aviation is not that. 135 public airports in Minnesota, 9 have airline service. That means all the rest of them have no airlines. They're not, and so, you know, if it's only airlines, why would all those others exist, right? And so the reality is there's a lot more other things that go on in aviation well beyond the airlines. General aviation is what most state aeronautics offices spend the vast majority of their time on. The big hub airports, the MSPs of the world, you know, we work with them, we provide funding for them, those kinds of things, but ultimately they really kind of manage I mean, they have a lot of staff and all of that, but they're these self-contained cities, if you will, for that kind of aviation activity. General aviation activity, though, a lot of small towns that we work with. Of the 135 airports in the state, 77 of them are owned by a city with a population less than 5,000. So for those folks who are perhaps familiar with state aid, that's kind of that threshold, that 5,000 threshold. So lots of really small towns that we work with on a daily basis. So what do we do? So we'll start at the beginning, aviation planning. We put together a state aviation system plan. It's sort of a state of aviation in Minnesota. We do an inventory of all the airports. We look at their condition. We have performance measures and outcomes that we've established in the planning process. It helps guide our investments. It helps elected officials, state and federal, to make choices about what the future of aviation should be. We mentioned navigational systems. We, MnDOT, own about half the navigational systems in the state. That is unusual. There's a few other states that also own navigational systems. Most states don't. Virtually all the navigational systems in the country are owned by FAA. That's one of the things that's kind of interesting and different, I would say. So like in MnDOT, when we think of MnDOT is a $3 billion a year organization. Our budget annually, $3 billion. 5,000 employees. Aeronautics is a rounding error. We're maybe 40 employees, about $20 million. So very small. When you get to the federal level, you reverse that. Federal Highway Administration is minuscule compared to the Federal Aviation Administration. FAA is massive, tens of thousands of employees, air traffic control, all those kinds of things. When we think about the operation of the national highway system, the states own that. Congress, Federal Highway Administration, they don't deal with snow and ice. They don't deal with establishing speed limits. The states do the operations and maintenance of the national highway system. Federal government has operational role in aviation, air traffic control, all those kinds of things. So they have lots of people in that kind of piece. So it's just a different kind of animal. That's why they own a lot of the navigational systems. But there are, like I said, a few states, us and a few others, that also own navigational systems. So we own about half. Airport development. So we provide funding to airports for construction projects. So pavements, all those kinds of things that you would typically think of in the civil engineering world. Operations and licensing. So to be part of the state's public system, to receive public funding from the state, from the federal government, you have to be a licensed airport. We go out to those airports, we inspect them. It's every 3 years they get inspected. There's certain criteria that they have to meet in order to continue to be licensed. We also license aviation businesses. So if you're an aerial photographer, you have to get a commercial operator's license from us. We do tax collection. We collect aircraft registration taxes. So just like you get license tabs on your car, you go to the Department of Public Safety for that. For aircraft, you have to get a registration from us. You come to MnDOT Aeronautics for that. And it's a lot more expensive to register your aircraft than it is to register your car, even the fanciest of cars. But it's an annual fee. It's a lot of the funding that we get comes from aircraft registration. Got another slide here. And then air transportation. So we have the state plane. There's actually more than one. There's two that we use primarily for transporting passengers. We actually own 4 planes. We have 2 King Airs and 2 Bonanzas. The King Airs are primarily used for transportation. The Bonanzas are primarily used. They're kind of like our work trucks, if you will. We use them for the work we do at the airports, but we also do transport passengers in them from time to time. I prefer flying in the Bonanzas. You really know you're flying when you're in those. They're smaller than the King Airs for sure. Where do we get our money? So just like there's Trunk Highway Fund, and you can only use trunk highway money for a trunk highway purpose, there's a state airports fund, and you can only use that money for an aviation purpose. We're unique amongst the modes in that we have this standalone legislatively dedicated funding. There's an aviation fuel tax, like gas tax with cars, fuel tax for aviation, aircraft registration, which I mentioned. Sales tax on aircraft goes into the state airports fund, as does, there's a special tax, it's called an airline flight property tax. And what that is rather than paying a property tax on their fleet, they pay this tax instead. And so the airlines, we assess them on an annual basis, flight property tax. So all of those sources combined go into the state airports fund. Like I said, around $20 million a year, and we use that to support 135 airports. So airports are a lot less. A large airport, one of those key airports, the largest kind, the threshold there is a 5,000-foot runway. So less than a mile of pavement for just the runway. Yeah, taxiways and stuff like that, you could get a couple of miles of pavement at a really good-sized airport. But most of the airports aren't that size. Like I said, 77 of the 135 cities with a population less than 5,000, so relatively small airports. Vast majority of airports do not have a single employee that works for the airport. The city administrator sort of runs things. The city public works guy takes care of plowing the runway. City clerk keeps the books and does the paperwork. So it's really just, maybe 5% of their regular city job, and they sort of have this airport over here that they do things for. But it's very unusual. The outlier is actually airports with full-time employees. Of course, the large airports do have full-time staff, but most of the small ones don't have a single employee that is just airport. What our state funding goes towards. So we give grants to the airports for their construction projects. So there's a local match required. So sometimes it's 90-10 or 80-20. So it'd be 80% state money, 20% local. So that's all kinds of construction projects, not just runway things. We do buildings, terminal buildings, AD buildings. We do things like perimeter fencing around the airport. There's just all kinds of things associated with an airport that we normally don't have to deal with when we're on the highway side of things. Maintenance and operations, we actually provide, and it's a bit of an outlier too. When you think about the way federal money as it flows to the state, typically the federal government does not pay for maintenance and operations kinds of things. State government does that. But then if you shift and you think about the state giving money to cities and counties for roads, we typically don't pay for maintenance and operations of city and county roads. We only pay for construction. It's not true for airports. With airports, federal government doesn't, they just give the construction money, but they carry a lot of the burden of the operations piece. At the state level, though, we do participate in the maintenance and operations of the airport. So, for example, that city guy, when he goes out and plows the runway, he tracks his time, fuel, all those things, and we give them money for those kinds of activities. So they do get money from us for that. Federal funding, I drew a comparison here. Everyone's familiar, I think most folks might have heard that at the federal level, there's just a new transportation bill, right? Everyone was so excited. FAST, I think that's what it's called. Before that, it was MAP 21. Before that, it was Safety Blue, T21, and then Ice-T was before that. Ice-T is the first one I ever really kind of remember being aware of. And I picked Ice-T because there's an S in there. IS, Intermodal Surface Transportation Equity Act. FAST, that just passed, is a surface transportation bill. Does not include FAA. It never had. FAA is a separate bill, separate funding. Even though it's within the DOT, they're completely separate. So the way surface transportation kind of typically works at a very simplistic level is that there's a formula at the national level based on infrastructure, number of roads, population, all kinds of things go into that formula. And then the money is directed to the state. The state kind of receives this block grant, and then the state and the MPOs have this decision making that they go through on how the money gets spent. The Federal Highway Administration delegates a good bit of authority to states. So, for example, folks in MnDOT who might work on the environmental process, are probably aware of how much the role that MnDOT plays in that. And there's a national highway system that federal funding is focused towards. When it comes to FAA, there is also a formula, but it's directed to the airport. So each airport has a certain amount of money that's targeted towards that airport. Here in Minnesota, we have, we're called a channeling act state, which means we have less of a role than like the block grant states would in terms of administration and oversight of that funding. FAA retains a lot more authority than Federal Highway Administration does, including the NEPA determination, that environmental determination. Anyone who's ever been in project management and worked through environmental processes, when you think about parks, for example, airports are federally obligated land. So when you start dealing with an airport, you're dealing with some complexity that you maybe didn't anticipate. You think, oh, this is just some city-owned property. No, no, no. If that airport is on the national system and they've accepted a federal grant, you're dealing with federally obligated land, and it's not so easy to just move airports around and that sort of thing, because ultimately the feds have a role in making sure that that property continues to be used for an aeronautical purpose. And oh, by the way, we MnDOT Aeronautics have a role in making sure that that property continues to be used for an aeronautical purpose. And so I got some tools to help folks with that when they might engage with airports as part of their regular job. I mentioned the National Plan Integrated Airport System. So it's the equivalent of the National Highway System. But so of the 135 airports in Minnesota, 70% of them are on the NIPIS, meaning they're federally eligible for money. Federal government still has oversight over them, but they don't get any money for it. So they don't get money for their construction projects for those other 30%. They do get state money. Regulatory role, I mentioned commercial operators. So when you think about, you know, we kind of have in highways, we can have a mixed role with the Department of Public Safety. They really have no role in aviation. I mean, they have planes and they fly, but they don't have that regulatory role. We carry that role in aviation, and so we do some commercial operator licensing, aircraft registration. I mentioned 5010 inspections. 5010 is the federal process, so basically we contract. FAA does some of the inspection themselves. Sometimes they contract it out. We contract with the contractor, so we're doing the federal inspection. So it's a shell game of moving funding around, but ultimately we do the inspections on behalf of FAA. And then, of course, we license the airports. Any guesses to this airport? It's actually not in Minnesota, but we provide funding for it. Kathy Vesley, who works in our office, said she made the mistake of putting this on a legislative report one time, and it diverted the whole conversation. This is Red Wing. And so city owns the airport, but it's in Wisconsin. We provide funding for it, though. It's part of our system. So
It's almost Highway 63.
yeah.
Weird, yeah.
This is kind of the spread of the different navigational systems we own. These are located on airport. Sometimes they're just off the airport, so we have land issues we deal with sometimes with leasing private property or different things like that. But you can see lots of little towns there. You know, there's Fergus Falls, Wheaton, you know, lots of towns that I'm sure many of the folks in the greater Minnesota districts would be familiar with, but typically not the kinds of communities we think of when we're thinking about state transportation systems.
So these are the ones that are state-owned?
Yes.
Okay. Because I saw that Thief River wasn't there, but that's an international airport.
Yep, and so that stuff there would be owned by FAA. Yep. Other things we do, so just like we produce a state highway map, we also produce a aeronautical chart. I'll pass this around for you guys to look at. It's not a map. It's actually a chart. You go after it with pencil and tools, and you do measurements and all of those kinds of things for flight planning. So pass that around if you guys want to take a look at that. Oh, I'm going to show it to the crowd there. Airport directory. We also publish this each year, and the picture on the front of the directory for 2015. This guy's actually retired. This is one of DNR's aircraft they use for firefighting. For 2016, we haven't shown it yet. We actually ran a contest on Facebook. Minnesotans could submit photographs of their aircraft flying in Minnesota, and we ran a contest on Facebook. So the winner will be able to have their aircraft on the cover of the directory, which is very coveted. That's the first. It was popular. I think the more we do it, the more popular it's going to get. So we want it to represent Minnesota and flying. A little bit about the directory. So it's each airport. There's 2 pages side by side. One side has got some general travel information, and the other has some very detailed airport information. So I showed you that Brainerd Airport. That came out of this. And so pilots would use this to help them make choices. So, for example, one of the things they might use this for is, is there available fuel? This is Grand Rapids. There is 100 low lead and Jet A. So many different kinds of aircraft can fly into that airport. So that's something they want to know. So I'll pass this around. This we provide. Nothing's free, right? But it actually, all registered aircraft owners receive one, and then we hand them out at conferences and things like that for pilots. So we produce that on an annual basis. Pilot safety seminars. Pilots are required to not only stay current in the aircraft they're flying, so they have to do a certain amount of flying, a certain kinds of flying. They're also required to attend training on a regular basis. So our pilots go out and we do pilot safety seminars. There's others that do those as well. Flight schools, businesses that sell aviation type things will host safety seminars. We do it free of charge. Our pilots teach those classes all around the state. MnDOT, did anyone ever, have you ever seen like on TPT, on public television, the weather information, that weather scroll? I see some heads nodding. That used to be us. We provided all of that stuff. We were behind the scenes with that. We had a contract where we ran all of that stuff. A few years ago, we decided to kind of start getting out of that business. TPT, they ran a scroll on the screen. People freaked out because they were going to look. I mean, I'm like, I can't believe there's people sitting in their kitchens watching the weather scroll hour after hour after hour, but evidently there were. So we hired a contractor to develop the little algorithm that goes and pulls the data from all the different sources so that we could disengage from that. And one of the reasons we did is that we found that pilots more and more aren't really using that. They all have their own favorite internet sites they use for weather. But when we do provide at virtually every public airport in the state, we have a computer set up there so that they can go and they can do their weather briefing. We provide that service because weather is vital. If you want to know what the weather forecast is tomorrow, just ask a pilot. They always know. They're experts in weather. We do aviation education programs, and I didn't get many answers on my quizzes, so I don't know if I want to give out my slide or not. But here's an example of one of our education programs we do. We participate in International Aviation Art Contest. Schools all across Minnesota participate. The classroom gets curriculum so that they can teach aviation kinds of things, as well as the art contest. And then each year we accumulate all the winners into a calendar. So I've got a couple here. If someone would like a 2016 calendar, it's not a 2014 or anything like that. But that contest it's been going on for quite some time. It used to be that they would have the ceremony for that contest at the state capitol, and I couldn't imagine anything more boring for a 7-year-old kid than to go to the state capitol. And so we've started having those contests at airports, and it's been very popular since then. So we one year we took them to St. Paul, the downtown airport. The National Guard has a nice training room there. They let us take the kids down into the hangar. The kids got to crawl all over the National Guard's helicopter, take pictures with their parents. Lifelink was coming in. They landed right there in the helicopter right there in front of the kids, so they got to see a helicopter land right in front of them. Last year we went to South St. Paul Airport. Whip Air is there. They're the ones they're famous for the floats, for like making floats for float planes. And so parents go with the kids on this, so the parents get to see active aviation businesses, aviation jobs, that sort of thing. We also do statewide contracts for the airports. So, for example, we do a pavement marking contract. We do a statewide contract to do refresh pavement markings. I know traffic folks can understand the logistics of that. There's, if we don't hit the northern airports at the right time, then they might miss a year. And so there's a lot of things to work out on that. We do pavement condition. We monitor pavement condition in all the airports and put together annual reporting for that. You can see we have pavement issues as well. I will say, though, that's a difference between like aviation. All of FAA has tens of thousands of employees, massively big. I think FAA is bigger than the whole rest of the DOT combined. They have like one pavement guy. Pavement's just aren't the thing. They have, FAA is very short, has a handful of designs you can use and nothing else. And there's really, if you're looking for innovation in pavements, I don't think aviation is the place to go. This is where you can find us. You just click the airplane. I don't know if everyone knows that these are clickable. I will confess I don't know what happens if you click the car. I just assume you just stay on that page and it's just all of MnDOT. But if you click on the airplane, you'll get to our site. And I show you this to show you some tools that I think working on the highway side of MnDOT that might be useful for you. These airport influence maps. If you go to the airports tab and select those, this is Jackson. This is a Jackson Airport in Jackson, Minnesota. And this green blob around the airport. If there's anything going on there, give us a call. So what could be going on that obviously you don't call us if you're just doing snow plowing, right? But anything that's tall, whether it's permanent or temporary. So let's say, for example, we're going to be doing some work on the bridge, and you're going to bring in a crane for 2 weeks. Give us a call. There's actually that particular airport, because of the way that crosswind runway is, there's actually some federal aviation paperwork that needs to be done to have a crane at the approach to that particular runway. Permanent lighting, absolutely. The Lafayette Bridge, a lot of folks are familiar with that bridge. When you drive over the bridge and you notice the lights are really short. And during construction, whenever you go through, the cranes all had their heads bowed unless they were operating. That's because of the airport, because of the proximity to the airport, because of the height issues there. It's because those approaches, all those multiple approaches, they go out for a couple of miles. And so height can have a huge impact on the airport. Anything that's going to generate steam. We have had one airport in Minnesota that moved because of a factory, a Wilmer, moved because of the land use near it. Steam, obviously. Solar is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. It's hard to see all that lighting and everything as you're approaching the runway if you've got solar panels glaring in your eyes. Zoning, there's zoning or land use zoning around airports for safety, and we're heavily involved in that. So any kind of development activity near airports, any kind of maintenance activity, particularly anything that's going to bring in something tall. Roads are actually, it's not uncommon for them to be too tall. When we think about civil engineering and the things we do with highways, when it comes to a hazard, we eliminate it, we mitigate it, and then if we're desperate, we just delineate it. We don't really have quite as many options sometimes with aviation, so sometimes we just have to live with some of the hazards, like some of those obstructions, but ultimately we do try to eliminate them where we can. Got a little bit about drones. I'm going to go through these quickly. I know we're running out of time.
Take 10, 15 minutes. We
Sure.
started late.
I wanted to touch on this. First of all, to let you know, we are the state aviation agency. We have a regulatory role when it comes to drones. There's a lot of misinformation out there about drones, and so we've done some online training. We've got lots of information available for you. If you are even hiring a contractor that's going to use a drone, there's a MnDOT policy on it. You're required to contact us and work with us on those things. This is from Minnesota state law. So basically, an aircraft is anything that flies. Remember I told you aircraft registration, you're required to pay a fee. Commercial operators licenses. We could have been registering paper airplanes under this law. We've chosen not to. Historically, the way we've selected what to register and what not to register was the same thing that FAA did. If FAA put an N number, so when you see a tail number on a plane, you see those big numbers on the side of the plane, that's an N number. N means it's flying under the flag of the United States. Every country has a different letter. United States is N, obviously, right? But if FAA chose to give something an N number, then we would register it. For commercial drones, so a company, let's say a surveying company who's going to, I don't know, survey a wall as part of a project in the northern part of the state, a company that's going to perhaps, I don't know, inspect a bridge using a drone, those are commercial operations. They're required to register with us. They're required to pay certain taxes. They're required to do things with the FAA, all of those kinds of things. That's where we are right now. Now, I've got some more stuff on hobbyists because I'm sure someone here had a child or a nephew or someone they know that has one. So I'm going to so you'll walk away more informed. There's basically three kinds of drone operations. There's public, civil, and model. Public is governmental. That sometimes us, sometimes not us. With our regular planes that we fly, so if a handful of you got on the state plane and went to Bemidji for a meeting, that would not be a public operation. That would actually be a civil operation. Public operation is if the aircraft itself is being used for the thing. So, like firefighting, search and rescue, those kinds of activities are public. So law enforcement is almost always a public operation. Public operations have a lot fewer rules. In some instances, you don't even have to be a pilot. That's how less those public rules are. But you have to be a government agency. Of that, there's no doubt. Civil is basically everything else. For drones, we have this model category, and that's basically hobby and recreational. So you go and you buy something. So here's public. I'll go through each of these. So public, you have to go to FAA. You still have to get a COA. You still have to come to MnDOT. We require you to register that aircraft. You do not have to pay a fee. University of Minnesota owns drones. They use them as part of their aeronautical engineering programs, things like that. Kids they build them as part of their senior project and all that kind of stuff. They come and register them with us, but they don't have to. The fees are waived. An example of another one like this: a county could own a drone and use it for doing survey work, for example. We wouldn't require they pay a fee. If they hire a contractor to do it, that contractor is required to pay a fee. You're not able to reach out and cover them under your public.
So the drone is used for bridge inspections.
They had to pay a fee.
Because that was a contractor.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yep. Just like we would not, the guys who are hauling asphalt on a construction project have to have a CDL. We don't tell them you don't have to have a CDL because you're working for the state.
But if Steel Bridge were to buy one, and use
if they were to purchase one, they would still have to register with us.
Right. But
they would not have to pay the fee. I don't know. Maybe highways they have to pay the fee. There's so much more money in highways than there is in aviation. Civil operations. This is what most people will have to do in terms of commercial. Section 333 exemption and civil code. So Section 333, you remember I mentioned FARs, Federal Aviation Regulations? This is what you got to know to be a pilot. To build a plane, it's about 10 times that tall. I mean, it is stacks and stacks and stacks of regulations, information, all that. The Section 333 exemption is actually exempting you from certain regulations that apply to manned aircraft. The COA is a certificate of waiver. It is waiving certain federal regulations that apply. So there's a lot of folks who say, oh, FAA is trying to figure out, how they want to. FAA has always believed that they regulate this. We've always believed that we regulate it. FAA, the regulation has been by exception. They said, if you operate in a certain way, we won't regulate you. And so there's a lot going on with it. We require registration of commercial operators, annual fee. They're required to have insurance, as well as in the commercial operators, also a fee and insurance. Minnesota is unique in that we require aircraft owners to have liability insurance. So just like you have to have insurance for your car, you got to have insurance for your plane. Most states, that's not the case. And so Minnesota has some very specific laws related to that kind of liability. If Santa Claus brought someone you know a drone, this is what would apply to them. Like I said, they have always believed that they own it. Everyone keeps trying to think, oh, commercial, not commercial. Really the thing to know is hobby or not a hobby. So if you're a farmer and you have a drone and you're just out playing with the kids, no problem. If you go out and you fly your field and collect data, that is not a hobby. That is a commercial operation. You may not be making any money. In fact, there might be some years you lose a lot of money. Doesn't matter. You have still moved into a different world when it comes to federal regulations, when it comes to state regulations. So basically, if it's something that's furthering your business, you can have the same exact aircraft and be playing with it to just take pictures. If you become a wedding photographer, if you are a real estate agent and you're taking pictures of houses, those are commercial operations. You got to go to FAA. You got to come to us. There's some good info. This is something that FAA put together. On MnDOT's website, we have some good information about drones. We have a listserv so you can sign up to get emails on how things are changing, that sort of thing. So ultimately, there is a lot you need to know. It's been interesting watching this evolve. I think drones they're certainly changing aviation as we know it. Today, what we're talking about are aircraft that are under 55 pounds. It's going to be only a matter of, and within line of sight, meaning you have to be able to see the thing. You can't use binoculars. You got to be able to see it. I mean, if you have glasses, you can see it with your glasses, but you got to be able to see the thing. FAA has already allowed some research, experimental things that are out of line of sight, like the railroads, for example, flying their right of way. And
Amazon.
Well, yeah,
they're
interested for sure. And then larger, clear. I mean, there's drones. The military has drones that are bigger than normal planes are. I mean, massive. And so, to do deliveries and things like that, you have to get over 55 pounds. I mean, by the time you put the device together, the battery to run it, the computer information on it to communicate all of that, you've eaten up a lot of that 55 pounds. So, you know, I don't know how many people are going to want a toothbrush delivered to their house by a drone. You know, if you want to deliver any kind of substantial package, you're going to have to be over 55 pounds. So that's coming, and it's just a matter of when and what the regulations will look like. But ultimately, though, it's good business for aviation. It's going to bring a lot of young people into aviation. There are going to be requirements for training, no matter what. So learning how to operate and all of that. And so flight schools and things like that will get some activity from that. Right now, commercial operators, lots of requirements in terms of training, pretty close to either you got to be a pilot or pretty close to pilot in terms of ground school and things like that. But it continues to evolve. This was sent to me. It was a picture. I think a Star Tribune reporter took this. That's Aaron Rodgers' jersey. This was a tailgating event that happened this fall, Vikings Packers. And I sent it to FAA. Had FAA been witness to it, I think even if they had been able to find the person, they would have gone after them for this, because this was, I mean, it violates so many federal laws. You can't even, and, you know, FAA sometimes starts with fines around $10,000 kind of thing. What FAA has mostly been going after are things that endanger the airspace, endanger manned aircraft, endanger airports. But when you have flagrant things like this that endanger the public, because local law enforcement is struggling to know exactly where their authority lies and where it doesn't in these kinds of incidences. So we've been trying to do a lot of education. There's more to come. In December, FAA announced that if you're a hobbyist, so if down in the bowels of your basement somewhere, when you were 17 years old, you pieced together a model plane, if it is airworthy and you want to fly it, you need to go register it. One of the challenges that we're having with drones is that used to be the reality of model aircraft. Model aircraft used to be people building them. So they had to know the difference between an aileron and an elevator. They had to know how to make the thing fly. So they had to learn about aviation. They had to learn the rules of the sky. There's different altitudes. Aircraft don't just all just fly at random. There's different altitudes, different aircraft fly in, north-south at certain altitudes, east-west at certain altitudes. There's just piles and piles and piles of rules. It used to be that the hobbyists were the kind of folks who were interested in aviation, so they learned all that stuff. Now you can go online, buy one on the internet, 2 days later it's at your house, within an hour you're flying it. You don't have to know anything because the technology has gotten so simple to use. And so FAA's been requiring this. There's a national modeling organization that's worked for years and years that's been perfectly safe. I had read that they were going to file suit because Congress, plain language interpretation of the last federal reauthorization was that FAA was not supposed to put any more regulation on hobbyists. Of course, they view requiring registration as more regulation. They're actually registering the operator, not the aircraft. So if you've got 5, you register, you get 1 number, and you have to physically write that number on each one of your aircraft. Minnesota legislature is going to be in session. We're hopeful to be talking with them about some potential tweaks to our existing laws. And then this coming summer should be the final rule. Right now, everything is by exemption and waiver and all those kinds of things. Once FAA has some final rules, then it'll be a lot more automatic in terms of being able to register your commercial aircraft. Commercial for us, MnDOT has state planes. They're for all state employees, not just the governor, not just the fancy higher-ups. It's actually for everyone traveling on state business. We have a fly-dry calculator. We help you determine if it's more cost-effective to fly or drive. The example I use a lot, I'm actually going there tomorrow, is Bemidji. You know, if you're driving there, you're looking at 8 hours of windshield time. Flying, 2 hours of travel time, you know, an hour there, an hour back. So we're not going to just put one person on one of these planes. Typically, we need, 2 or 3. We do have the bonanzas that are available this time of year, not as readily available because they're because of the icing conditions. These can fly in non-icing, the others not so much. But feel free to call us if you're contemplating a trip. The money doesn't come out of your budget or your district. MnDOT actually sets aside a budget at the beginning of the year, and that's the money we use for MnDOT staff to travel. You still have to, of course, have your supervisor, your office director, your district engineer, whomever, sign off on it. But that the budget comes from a separate account. So anyway, it's a great way to travel. There's no doubt about that. Also, coming this spring, we're offering ground school. We periodically do that. It's taught by our pilots. If you're interested in aviation, if you're interested in just kind of expanding your understanding of the modes, learning the language of aviation, it's a great thing to do. Also, if you are contemplating having your office or your work area purchase a drone, or if you are going to be hiring consultants or contractors that are using drones, I encourage you to sign up for that class. You'll see the announcement through the regular training announcement channels. There's no fee. It is a time commitment. It's one day, it's half a day, 1 day a week for 10 weeks. So 4 hours a week for 10 weeks. So it'll be every Wednesday morning. And you'll get your own set of those books so that you can impress your friends and family. It'll be on Plato Boulevard in our office there. So, yeah, sign up. It's good. I went through it. I learned a lot, and it's kind of good to, it opens up a whole new world. It really does. I mean, imagine, when you think about, driving is something most of us do every day, or at least we're in a vehicle that someone else is driving. And so you just sort of absorb a lot of things. Even little bitty kids, you see the toddlers and they're, steering a wheel. They kind of start understanding things. Most of us don't have the experience of sitting in a cockpit and sort of absorbing through osmosis aviation. And so ground school is a good way to learn that. And that's all I had. I do have some giveaways for folks that are interested. Pink airplanes, you put these together, you got to put a penny in it to keep the nose down. Some combination flashlight compass keychain. So that's quite the value there. I mentioned the calendars earlier. For the baby boomers amongst you that are perhaps interested in it, they have mood pencils. So they change color as you hold them. So there's some stuff, and also some handouts on drones if you know someone who's purchased. Right now, MnDOT policy is not purchasing. We're working with senior leadership on that. Ultimately, they'll have to make the decision in terms of managing risk if we're going to purchase or not purchase. But we have used them a good, bridge inspection, things like that, and anticipate we'll be doing more of that. So we're happy to talk a lot more about drones or anything else aviation related. Yes.
As far as careers are concerned, what is the need for people who are trained in this industry? Is it dropping down? Is there still? It's complicated, so there's lots. Actually,
there's quite a bit of a shortage right now. Aviation, no matter the career, well, perhaps opera singer, there might not be a place for that, but most career paths, there's an aviation piece of that. So, for example, in our office, we've got civil engineers, electrical engineers, aeronautical engineer, planners, folks with a city planning kind of background, graphic artists, people with education background, kind of a wide array. There's a lot of folks are talking about a pilot shortage. There's a number of things that are at play. There were some changes at the federal level that set the bar a bit higher for airline pilots. But baby boomers retiring. Aviation is highly technical. And not only is it highly technical, it's the kind, in order to move up in pilot, you have to have time in the seat. And so time takes time, obviously. So any career that combines needing technical plus time, the baby boomer wave of retirement has a huge impact on it. So pilots, there is no doubt there's an impact there, but it's true across the board. We're seeing it in mechanics. We're seeing it in all kinds of skilled labor that's needed sort of on the periphery of aircraft. We're actually just started a project with Minnesota Management and Budget to do sort of a state of aviation education, and we're interviewing aviation employers all across the state to make sure that our system is feeding that workforce piece. Minnesota has a lot of folks who have that kind of the fine skills that are needed, but they're not going into aviation. They're going like into medical devices, things like that. Aviation's got to do a better job of talking to them, high school, post-secondary, that sort of thing. But aviation right now is kind of growing, still kind of a bit flat. Generally, aviation tends to lead the economy, not lag the economy. So, example, before September 11th, aviation was actually declining. September 11th put it in the basement. We've seen some increase in activity and all of that. There's a lot going on. A lot of folks hear things about the airlines, and airline profitability and all that. They really haven't been profitable all that long. It's only been a couple of years here, but they're controlling the market in a different way than they have in the past. They've vastly reduced the number of seats by 1 million or more. And so they're by controlling capacity, it helps manage their profits, and it's making the system work, because ultimately if airlines are bankrupt, you can't go to Mexico. So it's been good right now, but I would say in general things are relatively flat, perhaps slightly improving, kind of like the economy. You kind of hear sort of flat but little improvements. That's kind of what aviation looks like right now. But in our office, like I said, we have a wide array of careers. We try to hire the best candidate whenever someone comes before us, but we do like to have a balance in our office of kind of MnDOT insider people versus people who just come to us straight up out of aviation that never worked for MnDOT, or so people who perhaps work for an airline or something like that.
Is your drone information on your website?
Yes, it is on our website. If you go to the website, it should be right there on that front page. And then there's plenty of, Yeah, I think if you even just searched on MnDOT site, you'd find UAS. And I've had the conversations that unmanned doesn't quite seem like appropriate language in this day and age, but that's what FAA calls it. That's what all the regulations call it. So that's, for better or worse, that's what we call it right now. Aviation has a lot of military history, military language. So aircraft, airmen, unmanned, there's a lot of that kind of stuff.
This technology is changing a lot of things.
Yes.
I've seen things on YouTube where you've got a drone
Yeah.
that can carry a human.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, that's manned aircraft.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think that I have no doubt that we'll see freight movement with drones at some point. Moving passengers. I mean, I think a lot of pilots would tell you even today that, I mean, the airlines, a lot of that is automated and all those kinds of things. But the American public, all public, there's something about flying that just still seems a bit miraculous. You know, they're sitting in a chair in the sky, and there's something, I think, in human nature that makes us not want to trust that to just a machine. We want a person there. I think that it might change the nature of the flight crew over time, but will we see commercial airlines that are completely no pilot in our lifetimes? I don't know. I don't know. There's something about aviation and safety. I mean, Americans voluntarily stand there and get full body scans. You know, I mean, it is because of that safety piece. Well, you know where to find us. Thank you. Good luck with your next model presentation.
I know this went a little bit long, but I think that it was very worthwhile. I actually had more questions I'd like to ask you, but I realized that we're running out of time. But thanks for being here, and then we'll see you next month when we talk freight. So take care.
I actually have one of these
Yep, get your call.
calendars.
Oh, sure.